everybody, it's Chari here today, and I'm going to be making this shaker card with the Sweet Smiles stamp set, cutting out the center of that gumball machine, and using the gumballs as my shakers. So I made one earlier, so I'm going to show you how I did that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp out the gumball machine, and I'm going to be coloring with some Copics, so I'm just going to mount that to my clear block here. And I'm going to stamp it with Memento Tuxedo black ink because this works the best with Copic markers. So I'm just going to ink it up really good and stamp that on a piece of neenah solar white cardstock. And then I'm going to stamp out some of the gumballs here. And I actually stamped more than I needed, but you never really know how many you're going to need. I always feel like odd numbers are best. And then I'm picking out some of the little smileys and just filling them all in. I want to make them all different. You can make them all the same if you wanted, but there's so many fun little faces in this set. I think it's a great idea to give them all personality. And I've already cut out some pieces of paper from the pint-sized patterns in the beach side. I cut out the stars and then that orange. And then I'm going to use my Copic chart here, or my hex chart by Sandy Alnock. And I'm going to take those papers and find which Copics of mine match those papers best. Because I'm going to be using these papers as my background, so I want to pick some colors from my gumball machine that coordinate with the colors in the papers. So after I've picked out these colors here, here's what I've ended up with. Obviously you don't need the same ones, just whatever's the closest in your collection. And then I'm going to do some coloring, and I'm going to speed it up so that this video isn't terribly long. And I'll just play a little music while you watch me color. So now that my coloring is done, I'm going to take a craft knife here and I'm going to very carefully cut on the inside of that line of the glass ball. I'm leaving a little bit of an edge. I'm not cutting right along the line. You want to be sure that when you use the die to cut this out, it doesn't cut it too close and you tear that. But I am making sure I cut out the gumballs. So you want to cut close enough to the line to where you're still stability, but you want to make sure that you don't cut too far and then leave some of the gumballs on the edge. And you really want to do this before you cut out the entire gumball machine. It's a lot easier to do this when it's still part of the solid piece of paper. And then now I'll use the die to cut out the gumball machine itself. And I'm also going to use the die that matches the gumball to cut out the little pieces. So if you got to leave that edge in there so that it still has stability when you cut out the outside. So I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to use some Post-it note tape to hold it in place. And I'll repeat the same thing with the little gumball down there. Obviously I'm going to have to run it through quite a few times to cut out all the gumballs, but it's not too hard to do. It's easy to line up since it's a circle. So when you run it through your die cut machine, carefully take it out and you can see you have this very thin frame, which would be really hard to make a shaker card out of, but this is actually going to get inlaid inside that piece of orange paper, and I'll show you that here in a minute. So I finished cutting out the rest of my gumballs, and I'm actually going to go ahead and stamp out my sentiment on a piece of white cardstock because I'm going to make it like a little banner. You could also stamp the sentiment right on the orange, which is what I did on that first card I showed you earlier. But this one's a little longer than the one that says have a ball, and I didn't want to make the orange rectangle any bigger, so I thought this was a good compromise to make it like a little banner. So I usually just stamp close to the edge, and then I use the wire on my paper trimmer to see exactly where my cut's going to be, and then I cut a thin strip. And then I'll just use my scissors to cut it to the right length and to cut little banner ends on there. So I'm going to lay it on here to see kind of where I want to cut those banner ends. I want it to overhang the orange a little bit to make it look like it's purposeful. If it was right at the edge of the orange, I feel like it would look more like a mistake to me. But I don't want it to go all the way to the edges either. It's more pleasing to the eye this way. So after I cut those banner ends, I'm going to lay that on the orange just so I can kind of see where I want that gumball machine to line up. And I'm going to line up the die above the sentiment, leaving enough space for that sentiment to fit below. Run that through my die cut machine here. And so now I have a cutout. And then this gumball machine that I colored and cut out earlier will perfectly inlay right into that orange square. So you don't have to try and put foam behind the little gumball machine. We'll just put foam behind the whole thing. So I'm taking my navy piece of paper here with the little stars. I've put adhesive on the back, and I'm just lining it up on a white card base so that it has a white border all the way around it. And now I can work on putting together this piece that lays over top. So you could put a piece of white behind it if you wanted, or even color that piece of white with a Copic. I decided in the end to use this light blue paper that comes with the same collection of papers. But you can see there on the screen I did try it with Copics. Now, use some acetate. I have this pad of acetate that I bought at my local craft store at Michael's, but you can use anything you have. I don't know how many sheets this has in it, but I've made about 3 shaker cards, and I've only used this one sheet out of it because it's like 9 by 12. So I'm just going to cut it down. It's easy to cut with my paper trimmer, and I'm just going to cut it down so that it's slightly smaller than that red rectangle. And this is some glossy accents that I just put in a fine tipped bottle. And I'm just going to put a very fine line all the way around and kind of fill in. And then this will hold my acetate very strongly to the back side of my orange piece of paper. So I'm just going to lay that on there very carefully and kind of stick it down, make sure that I don't smush any of that glossy accents out. And I'm using that same bottle because it has that very fine tip, putting a line right around that frame. And then this will go inside here. And so this is basically gluing itself right on top of that acetate as well. So now it's all one cohesive piece. I'm going to put that light blue paper in the back so you can see it through the window. That will make the gumball stand out. And then here's my little trick for putting the foam adhesive around the circle. I saw someone do this. I don't remember who, I apologize, but I'm going to cut a strip and then I'm going to cut little notches in it, and I'm not going to cut all the way through, just almost to the other edge. And after I've cut the whole piece, then this will allow me to turn it around the curve. So you can just start somewhere, lay it right along the edge, and at each of those little joints kind of turn the tape, but the inside edge will stay continuous. And then I'm going to add some more right below it so that the whole thing has a lot of support behind it. So now it's time to add the pieces inside. So I'm going to take some of the gumballs here. I decided not to use that light blue one. I didn't think it showed up very well on the light blue background. And then I'm going to add a little more stuff to it. You can add sequins, you can add beads. I decided to add these little yellow star glitter things that I found at Michael's as well. I put a little too much at first, so I had to take some out. Actually, the end product still had a little bit too much. They don't shake very well. But I'm going to pull off all the backing from the adhesive. And then I'm just going to line that up so that my little pieces are right inside my gumball machine. And they shake around. They get stuck a little bit. I kind of filled it a little full. And then I'm just going to put that sentiment directly onto the orange piece. And then I add a little bit of glitter to accent it a bit. It just adds a little more interest, a little more pop and shine to the card. So here is the finished card, and here's a close-up look. I love those little smiling faces. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.